do you want to kick us off?
I will. So we're excited to have you joining us today for the Real Life Virtual Summer Institute. Welcome to Building a Picture of Proficiency. My name is Linda, and I'm your session host. I'm here to support the session presenter, who I will introduce shortly. Offer technical assistance to participants, as well as share this session evaluation and certificate information at the end of this session. Please don't hesitate to use the chat to ask questions or request technical support. And at this time, I would like to introduce to your presenter, Miss Sarah Kitzmiller.
Good morning, everybody. I am so honored that you all are here on a Monday morning at 10:31 with us. And thank you, Linda, so much for the introduction. We're going to be talking today about building a picture of proficiency. But first, as we start to dig in, just thinking about Zoom, remember to double click the screen to go to full screen and escape to go back. I always forget that myself. Expand or minimize the participants you see. And then this one's important for today's session for sure. Use the chat to ask questions or request support. And then video, mic, and mic controls, please keep muted if not speaking. So just a little quick reminder. And then session materials are posted. John has been dropping links into the chat already with the materials, so feel free to access those. And we're going to move into our learning space. I want you to please feel comfortable participating in this learning space today. It can be awkward. It's Monday morning, right? We're coming off of a great weekend, but we can be awkward together. There will be many opportunities for sharing and discussion. Please don't hesitate to share. The more we share, the more we'll learn. So let's dig into this learning together. Please share your voice so we can learn from one another. Each of us brings our knowledge and experience to this discussion, and let's have some fun together. So welcome. I'd like for us to start out. I would like for you to respond in the chat to this question. I'm curious to know, what do you believe is the most critical and essential tool in closing gaps for our students? So when you think about gap closure, as we talk about it, what do you think is the most critical and essential tool that we have in closing gaps for our students? So if you don't care to drop your response to that in the chat. I brought my coffee, so to make sure that I give proper wait time. So if you see me slurping coffee, that's why I'm trying to give the right amount of wait time. Catherine, students being so many different levels and abilities. Okay. Thank you, Catherine. Anybody else? Feel free to unmute and respond if that's more comfortable for you.
Patience. Laura Lee says patience. Janice says exposure to materials and being present in the classroom. And Mandy says to access to a wide variety of texts and tools. And Tammy says we have to understand where the students are so we can access the areas to help the student. And Denise says knowing your students' needs and purposeful planning.
Ooh, I love all of those responses. Thank you so much.
Miss Bethany says to close gaps, you first have to know where you are going and the path to get there.
Love that, Bethany. It's like you read my mind, maybe, because the answer to this question is you. I could easily today in this K-2 session talk about classroom environment and the efforts that you make to get to know your students, your procedures and routines. We could easily be talking about a lot of things, but the critical component to the work that is related to gap closure is you and you in the classroom doing the things that you do each and every day. And it was maybe a trick question, but it's you. So it's like you read my mind, Bethany. The goals for our session today are really to understand the importance of developing pictures of proficiency in your literacy curriculum. Learn why this practice is essential in closing gaps, and discuss structures that support planning and reflection practices anchored in analyzing tasks and student work in the unit. So today, when we move forward, we're gonna make sure that we're coming back to this and thinking about, do we understand that? And if you don't, I encourage you, even with our setting with the number of people we have today, please don't hesitate to unmute and ask questions or drop questions in the chat as we're going, as they arise, so that we can make sure to address those as we work through achieving our goals today. First of all, I'd like to kind of start out with some information here. This is from TNTP, The Opportunity Myth, and the other part of this information comes from a RAND study done in 2018. An inconsistent access to high quality content impacts student learning in schools across the country. So when we think about gap closure and we think about what we're talking about here, we can kind of make some connections. In a single school year, the average student spends 581 of 720 available hours on assignments that are not high quality. And I would even add to that, possibly not only not high quality, but not on grade level. And when you think about it, and I'm not a math person now, I think Bethany is, so you might have to hold me accountable here, Bethany, for my numbers talk. But 518 is well above 50% of 720 available hours. And it makes me wonder every time I read this, if the average student spends more of the 720 available hours on assignments that are high quality and are aligned to standards work associated with proficiency, would we not have a different result? So essentially more time on what needs to be mastered, more instruction around those kinds of things. When teachers, and on top of that, so this is kind of information that on top of that, when teachers don't have access to great materials, and I would also say use great materials, we hunt for them online, often leading to inconsistent quality that impacts low students and students of color the most. And I'd like to say here too, knowing that this is a K-2 audience, that we already know that part of the barrier to reading and the foundational work that we're doing is related to the language gap that kids come to school with already. So part of that inconsistency is maybe the language that we use when we're teaching kids different kinds of strategies, not in the same context that is off of what kids need to know and be able to do. And teachers, we end up spending 7 to 12 hours per week searching for and creating instructional resources. That's on top of our teaching already. So we know that you're already working on foundational skills work, working on reading rich, rigorous text with your kids. And we want to make sure that you get those hours back. And free and paid resources that you're pulling and drawing from a variety of sources, many of them unvetted. And again, many of them, even though they say they're on grade level, many of them are still below grade level. Linda and I were talking and laughing a little bit that we can remember on Sunday nights preparing for the week and pulling materials to get ready to feel extra prepared that we had that extra material. And it wasn't necessarily vetted. It was material that we gathered on Sunday night. And just by nature of that practice, probably we were not in the best mindset to be digging deeply into standards work and thinking about that. So we move into when teachers have access to high quality aligned instructional materials, when they use them regularly, daily, it makes a difference in their classroom practice and the instruction students receive. And this quote to me, especially when I think about gap closure and ESSER funds and the work that we're doing to help kids do better, when students who started the year off behind grade level were given more grade appropriate assignments, stronger instruction, deeper engagement, and higher expectations, the gap between these students and their higher achieving peers began to narrow substantially. And here's what I'm going to say too. I want to recognize this and call this out because I've experienced this myself. When we encounter new materials as teachers, we have learning that we have to manage for ourselves. We have preparation that we have to think about so that we can build knowledge of what kids need to know and be able to do. And ultimately, our session today is thinking about those processes and thinking about planning in a way that supports K-2 teachers as a way to support themselves building that knowledge together. Because you are the most valuable resource, I hope it brings you a sense of comfort to know that in your classroom right now, you have everything you need to close all of the gaps for your kids. So now I'm curious. I'm very curious. Based off the 3 slides that I just shared with you, what stuck out to you in the last 3 slides? What can we as teachers take away from this information related to instruction in our classroom that we designed to address gap closure? What can we do? What's the implication here based off what we just read? What can we do as teachers to address gap closure based off what we just read? It may just be something you're wondering about or would like to know more information about. It may be a sentence or a phrase or the quote. All right.
Richard thinks that we need higher quality assignments. And Mandy says that to make sure that the materials we use are of high quality and that the access to those materials is provided in a consistent manner. And to use the high quality text. Closing gaps is grounded in providing students access to high quality grade level learning experiences, according to Bethany. And Richard says that language is important. Exclamation mark. We need to ensure that we're using high quality materials and activities that are aligned and reach the depth of rigor, and making sure the materials are grade level and high quality to close the gaps of our students, according to April.
Well, the good news is if you have adopted curriculum materials, you have those materials in your hand. And I love the language that was shared in this sharing session around use and consistency and language. Because when we think about the gap that we're trying to close, it is especially in K-2 important to think about language and that consistency with the language, because we don't want kids who are struggling to form letters, to sound letters out, who have limited exposure at home and who are struggling coming to school, having to learn multiple ways to figure something out. That's going to weigh their ability to transfer into reading practice. So the more consistent we are with our usage within the language that we're using, the quicker and the more efficiently students can experience connection to what they need to know and be able to do. So thank you so much for sharing in the chat. I love what you were sharing. So ultimately, I always like a good visual, right? So I want you to think about, again, this process, this unit planning process is a way for you as teachers to take care of yourself. How can we manage all of this information that's new to us, particularly in K-2 with foundational skills and literacy skills embedded into the work that you're doing with kids? We want to encounter what proficiency looks like before we start teaching the unit. So that's why I call these bookend planning processes, because this is we're getting ready to go over the pre-unit planning process. And then just because of the way this is structured, what happens next is teachers teach. And you all will begin your unit instruction and complete through the final assessment, the final end of unit task analysis. And once that instruction and assessment time is complete, then you move into post-unit planning. What happens at the end? It's more reflective in nature, and it still connects to that standard work. The other thing I'd like to say here is that this is going to feel similar in that I know many of you in your schools have engaged in standard work. And we have historical data over the last several years of the success of that. And you can look at that and think about, okay, if we've looked at standards outside of the context of the unit, what if we use the context of the standards, the context of the unit to support what this standard might look like in this unit? So hopefully it will be kind of a scaffold for us as teachers to think about what instructional practices go along with that standard work. And then the post-unit planning work is really student work analysis, thinking about what is evidence, what is return on my instructional investment look like for students, and what am I connecting to as a teacher that I see is proficiency? Can I identify that? What does it look like? And then bringing that to a team setting. Guys, you are correct in assuming too that this process is 2 sessions, one pre-unit and one post-unit. So that's 2. Say you do 4 units, that would be 8 meetings a year. Just wanted to throw that out there. There's lots of other planning opportunities that happen in the meantime, but what makes this work so powerful is that the first session begins before teaching starts. Ultimately, the components at play here that help design this are backwards design. So we're going to go through this process before we teach to determine acceptable evidence based off our standard and the prompt language that we're using. What do we know students need to be able to do as readers, writers, speakers, and listeners? And then we're going to identify what that looks like through the end of the unit task. And then what happens next is that middle part of the bookend, like the unit work. Then you're going to take all of that knowledge into the instructional setting as you teach the lessons of your unit. So why would we do this? And why would it even work? What's the research saying? What can UBD do for me and my students? What can this pre and post planning work do for the grade level and my understanding as a teacher? Well, first of all, there's 2 components here at play, and this is based off of John Hattie's research. The first one is collective teacher efficacy. When we think about teachers coming together and working on identifying proficiency before we start teaching, and then believing that that work is powerful, that impacts what we take back to the classroom and then provide for our students. And that belief is important. Also, this concept of cognitive task analysis. But before we get there, I want you to look. Mean effect size of teachers meeting together working on important concepts for their students to do better is associated with 1.57, which I want you to keep in mind here that 0.4 is associated with a year's growth. So part of why this works is we are really leaning on people's ability to affect their focus and their work and their lesson structure and pacing, anchored in what students need to know and be able to do to be proficient. So as a teacher who's making decisions, thousands of decisions a day, if I am able to have a picture of what kids need to have at the end of the unit before I start teaching, that's going to allow me, as I engage in teaching in each lesson, to focus the most time on the things that I know kids need to know and be able to do. That's something to think about. It goes back to that 500 and some minutes out of 720 minutes not able to focus on what they need to focus on and shifting that. The other component to this is cognitive task analysis. This is a set of procedures, this process in and of itself, to think about the end of the unit task through the lens of your standards and the standards through the lens of your unit to identify what kids need to know and be able to do. And to be able to do that in a PLC is going to have tremendous impact. In fact, look here. The combined impact of these strategies, and you're looking at 2.86 effect size. Again, I'm not a math person, so I hope I did addition correctly here. But if you think about 0.4 is associated with a year's growth, part of why this works is, again, you're thinking about the end before you begin. And K-2, I have to say, I have the utmost respect for the work that you do. And I know this is frustrating sometimes. It's a very frustrating concept for me as both a teacher and a coach. I want you to keep this in mind. Sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. And this process is no different. In fact, I'm going to share with you a perspective of entering this work of a kindergarten and first grade teacher, which was, we know this already. So we're going to address that. But I want you to feel, you're going to maybe feel a little frustrated when you start this work, but it's okay to go slow. That's how you're going to get to go fast, because you're going to go through this process. Again, I only bring this up because I feel like too, it's worth it, right? We know these practices are anchored in research that makes the growth worth it. This is a lot. I included this slide in case any of you are planning on taking this back and talking about what this process or this protocol could look like. These are some of the steps in that, these are the steps in that protocol so that you can refer. But this is the true story here, and it's kind of long. The pre-unit planning process allows you to look at what students need to know and be able to do through the lens of your standards, the context of the end of the unit task, and procedural proficiency. And if that's not something that you've heard about, procedural proficiency in writing might look like beginning and end sounds present in words for kids. It might look a little different in K-2. How are kids using text? Are they going back to look at pictures in the text to get more information? Those are the kinds of things that we think about. What are we as a grade level saying behaviorally that kids need to do to show they're moving towards proficiency? How are they going back to the text to get information? Are they using the pictures? Are they holding the book correctly? Do they understand how the book is being held? These are things that you and your team may want to map out or lay out in this process while you're working with the standards and the end of the unit task as well. It gives your team time to unpack the information in the prompt related to what students need to know and be able to do by highlighting important words and phrases in both the prompt and the standards. Here's what I'm going to say. This could be a duh moment. Like, you may honestly take your highlighter and highlight a prompt that could be a single sentence long, and there might be one really important phrase. But it is worth unpacking that phrase together as a team to think about things that are similar or different, or maybe words and phrases that you could also call this, and kind of narrow that down or list that out. It's about building knowledge for you as teachers, and that's important work, but it's also going to feel like a duh moment. Your team then restates simply what this translates into, what students need to know and be able to do as readers, writers, speakers, and listeners. Finally, the meeting closes after this knowledge is used to design a list of features that need to be present in the end of unit task for proficiency to occur. Proficiency becomes clear and connected to standards and supports teachers in making instructional decisions related to lesson structure and pacing before you even begin instruction. So I'm going to stop right there because that was a lot. We've talked about a lot. We've talked about Hattie. We've talked about the research behind this, and we've just gone over the process. I'd like to just take a moment to address any questions or clarification anyone might need or is thinking about or wondering. You all are quiet. That's okay. If something pops up though, please drop it in the chat because I know that this is a lot and can be confusing, and I want us to make sure that we are getting through this together. So when you're preparing this material, or maybe the team leader or a coach, or you're asking assistance from your administration team, all you're having to do is copy the end of the unit writing task right here. And especially in kindergarten and first grade, I've even used this protocol with preschool. It might be, especially as you move through the year, it might get more involved, where in this case, the end of the unit task might be a conversation that you're having with kids and taking down information up. It might be something different than what we would traditionally call writing in that sense. Maybe it's pre-writing skills that you're looking for. Whatever that end of the unit task is, you would copy and paste that here. And then this step 2 is determine the thinking and knowledge in the unit. What you're going to do is paste the standards associated with the end of the unit task in this box. Then everything else is about the connections between the two. What in the prompt is suggesting what standard work kids are going to be doing. In K-2 in particular, you all will need to also consider the month that you're in as you're working through this based off of the level that kids are at. If it's the first of the year versus if it's in the spring. So what will students, what will they be able to as a reader, as a writer, as a speaker and listener? And then this concept of procedural proficiency is anchored in how will students identify and keep track of the thinking and processes that you have taught together in the class or the virtual class within the rigorous text and task. And for the case of K-2 here, this could be foundational evidence that you're looking for in the writing of the letter sound work and association that you're doing in your phonics lessons. So depending on what those are and depending on how that program connects to your unit work program. Are there any questions? I'm just going to stop here because, again, I feel like it's a lot. I want to make a note here because I've used this pre-K through 5th grade, but I've also used this 6th through 9th grade. And here's what I'm going to say that I love about this process. If there's components to this and wording to this that needs to change to make this more relevant to you, do it. It's not going to impact gap closure. This process alone is going to make that happen. So what I'm saying is that if you need to make adjustments, if your team feels the need to make adjustments here to add more important information, go for it. It's not going to impact the research, the effect, the correlation to the outcome for students at all. In fact, sometimes it helps make people feel more collective efficacy because we're able to make adaptations to this to fit our scenario. And so I want you to feel comfortable when you have these materials that you can go in there and make this work for you. I hope you do that. This is my favorite part. And sometimes this is where the meeting can get kind of heated because we all have our opinions about that. Jim Burke has a wonderful book about standards that I would highly recommend K-2 teachers looking at on top of this to clarify this as well. However, this is what I want to say. This is based off student work features. What standards work were we able to pull out that we can use this task to understand more? So when we think about what features will be present, again, K-2, you will add things like letters and sounds. They might use a plan or draw a picture plan. Those are the planning components here. Pre-writing features might be added to this. Again, adapt as necessary based off even your focuses within your school. Maybe your principal has targets that he needs you or she needs you to incorporate. That would go here as well. This is adaptable. I just placed these in here because these are the categories for the state writing rubric. And this becomes copied for the team to use to think about as they teach in the upcoming weeks in the unit. So as you start to engage in quick writes, maybe within the first 2 or 3 days of instruction, you can think about building towards the features that you list here as a team, and going into that work, you and your team have a copy of that. Here's the thing too that makes people feel a little unsettled, but I can only say based off experience. And again, as a coach supporting this pre-K through 5 through 6, you can absolutely do this and it not be exact, and it still have a tremendous impact and have student outcomes correlated to high correlation here to close the gaps. because of the time you've spent with the standards and the time that you've spent with the end of the unit task and knowing what kids need to know and thinking about where they are with their developmental skills based off the phonics instruction, this is going to give you an opportunity to make better than just thinking this is what they need. You're going to have time to sort of internalize and know. That's not to say that next year your team coming back to this might know even more and be able to adapt this even further to those targets. An approximation is okay here. There's not just one answer for each of these categories. It is actually based off the knowledge and skills of the team, and it's okay. All right, I know I've asked this quite a lot. I feel like I've done a lot of talking and you all have been great. I want you to think for a second, and if you don't care, drop your response to these two questions. How do you see this process supporting teachers' picture of proficiency? So when you think about proficiency, how is this supportive in us building that picture of proficiency? How can developing that picture support us, support teachers and students? How is this helpful to students? How is this helpful to teachers? Why is this important? Based off the process that we just looked at. I'm going to take a sip of coffee, so I wait. So if you don't care to drop your response in the chat, or you can unmute. Maybe it might be easier for you to think about, once this session was over in your classroom, how do you see this? How would you see the outcome of this session supporting your work, especially in K-2? Why do you, I mean, I'm curious too. Why do you think that this process is associated and correlated to such high student achievement, having a positive impact on student achievement in terms of closing gaps?
This is Mandy. My chat box says that it's disabled.
I hear someone talking, but you need to turn your volume up so I can fully hear you. I hear muffled talking.
Is that better? This is Mandy.
Yes, that's much better.
I had to put earbuds in. My chat box says that it's disabled.
Oh no.
Mine as well.
If you don't care, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, well, if John can help us with that.
As far as our meeting goes, the chat's wide open.
Okay.
I don't know if it's something on their end. I noticed that at Walter State, for example, their system had disabled chat.
It says the host disabled attendee chat is what the little message across the top of my box said.
I'll see if I can do anything. We didn't have that problem in our first session, though.
Thank you for sharing.
Which is interesting.
Mandy, was that you talking?
Yes.
It was.
That was Mandy. Uh-huh.
If you don't care, could someone, do you all feel free to unmute? If your chat is saying that, please feel free to unmute and we can share our responses to this.
No, that's me. We're trying to chat with her.
I'll go ahead and answer. I'm an interventionist.
Yes.
So for me, I think being involved in this process with teachers, like thinking about what they need to know for the end result, I think that the pieces of what they need to know would be helpful for me to use in the intervention sessions. So thinking about it from that different perspective.
I love that. So maybe thinking about that alignment of the language in the intervention classroom to the what's necessary for proficiency to happen.
Yes.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? All right. So I think John is continuing to work on that. And, oh, Bethany and Catherine, thank you for testing the chat. Yeah, I love, Catherine, what you just wrote. I love the idea of doing less. Listen, I mean, honestly, if anything, this is not talking about weekly planning where you're having to sit down with your team every single week, although I'm certainly not discouraging that. What I think is so powerful, though, is knowing that if we commit to doing the 8 to 10, depending on the number of units you're doing a year, you're looking at just double of that for the meeting. So up to maybe 10 meetings, as little as 8 meetings a year with your team, that is going to have a tremendous impact. And I realize this is a bit of a shift because historically, at least where I've worked, we've had pretty regular meetings around RTI, around students who are not achieving and how we can support those kids to proficiency. And ultimately, I think when we go back to that initial slide that I shared from the RAND study in TNTP, you know, when we're spending so much time on materials that aren't getting to the rigor of what kids need to know and be able to do, we have to wonder, should we be focusing on getting good at RTI or focused on getting good at Tier 1 instruction? And I think that when we think about that, the impact that it has for all students, not just my low students, not just my middle students, but also my high students, what is essential to instruction? I'll tell a personal story. My 6th grader, for example, is advanced. However, when he encounters difficult questions on tests, this concept of having to read the question and go back to find the best answer is just infinitely frustrating to him. What do you mean I have to go back to know? Well, when they bring the question to me and I read the question after reading the text, for me to be able to answer the question correctly, I have to go back. So he's one of those kids that from procedural, behavioral proficiency, what kind of things do good readers do? That's where that kind of consistent support would be beneficial because the message in his mind as a 6th grader is going back to the text means I don't understand. It means I'm getting it wrong. When it's none of that, it means that you do understand, that to understand fully, you have to reread. So it's kind of a shift in mindset, if you will. How can planning support instructional decision-making the most? And it's a cool concept to think before instruction starts. But yeah, Catherine, to your point, I love doing less too and having great results. So to continue this, I wanted to share with you all of it, but we don't have time to do that. I wanted to share with you a more comprehensive list of the updated Hattie research from Visible Thinking. And again, keep in mind the hinge point is 0.4 for a year's growth to occur. And again, you can unmute, but even looking at all of these, thinking about these practices, and obviously we don't have the definitions because there's a lot of practices here. Thinking about these practices rooted in instruction based off what I as a teacher know and understand about what's important knowledge for kids to build in a unit. I think particularly about things like, micro teaching, transferring strategies, classroom discussion. What does scaffolding look like? I mean, this is a great opportunity to have some discussion around what will extra support look like? If we have one teaching assistant in a grade level of 4, how can we share that person and what materials will they need based off of this thinking we did today? Can we provide them to ensure that kids get where they need to go? Summarization, deliberate practice. I mean, particularly around foundational skills, are we able to get real clear on the behaviors, the formation, the sounds that kids absolutely have to have by the end of this unit for them to be proficient is important. And it can influence those pieces. So by the time you add up all of the effect size here, you're definitely looking at this idea of teachers, of us being empowered decision makers and able to make decisions better around what is proficient. So this is in some case though, the favorite part of my work. So now we've done the pre-unit work, we've taught our unit, we've assessed the unit. And so now teachers, we are asked to bring to the meetings student work samples that reflect proficiency. What does that mean? So you pick not advanced, not below grade level, but what you as a teacher, based off of the student work features and the conversation we had in the pre-unit meetings, what students in your mind, just bring a couple, hopefully all of them, but just bring a couple, which ones reflect proficient work. So the lead teacher, the coach, the significant other, bring the student work features list from the pre-unit meeting. So we got to have those at this meeting. Your team then shares their student work over taking time to read and reflect on the student work features chart. The meeting closes once the team reflects on instructional practices that supported kids to achieve proficiency and decide on an exemplar out of the work shared in the meeting. Proficiency becomes more clear and connected to student work. Teachers get an opportunity to reflect on the standards work in student writing. And so again, we have a document I'm getting ready to walk through here, but this concept of, standards work, you're not having to listen to a coach or to maybe a district person or assistant principal talk through this. You all are actually making that comparison based off the work features chart. So as you're reading, as teachers are reading, you all are just listening and looking and thinking about the work that you've done and the work that the teachers are presenting to you to get this kind of concept of proficiency. I have a funny story to tell. In the school that I did this with for 2 years, the reason we started this process is the principal said, Sarah, I need something that prevents us from being a 1 and a 5 the next year. So we've been going from 1 to 5, 1 to 5. And so, we had done learning network for years in that building where we'd had a lot of continuums, and we felt like people knew what proficiency meant and what was their grade level work. However, we hadn't really revisited it, and we had some new units that we needed to work through in all grade levels, pre-K 5. And after doing this process, in 1 year, we closed all of our gaps at the state level. And in the next year, using this process, we not only closed our state gaps again, we closed the school one national gap closure. I will say the work was hard, but it was worth it. But I'll never forget the first year we started this, a kindergarten teacher followed me down the hall. I could hear her behind me. And she'd been 30-year veteran. She said, this is ridiculous. I can't believe you're going to make us do this because, you said that we could change the protocol any way we wanted to. She said, I want to change it. I want to get rid of it because our team plans together every week. We share resources. We provide documents. Like, we already do all of this. And I said, I am so sorry. I can tell you're frustrated. Let's just entertain me, humor me a little. Let's do this. And if it's terrible, we'll never do it again. And I made that promise to her right there. But I could tell she was upset, and it made me nervous. So this is the document that you have received in your materials. And I want to say this again, because I've had to change this for grade levels, for different schools that I've used this in. These questions don't matter as much as them getting at the heart of what the team needs. So if you're on here and you're an administrator, or you're on here and you're a team leader or a teacher, the questions here can fit your team, your grade level's needs, and it's going to work just as well. So you would put your student here. A lot of times, to keep anonymity, teachers would white out the kids' names on a copy they made and just put a number associated with the student's work and fill this out as the team goes through the examples. And then this is probably my favorite part. So after everyone has shared and all of that's fresh on our mind, and we have the poster of the features we agreed upon in our pre-unit session, we think about notes and observations regarding the patterns across student work samples. So what are we seeing here that's similar? What are we seeing here in my work and in all of our work? What is similar in our understanding in student work? what is different in our understanding? What are some features that popped up in other people's work that we like, that we feel like we need to absolutely add to that student work features chart there? Because there might be things that we didn't think about when we were unpacking the prompt that we need to add to that student work features chart to really capture proficiency. And then suggestions and ideas related to your teaching and instruction. What did you teach the most and find evidence of in their work? And I always call this an ROI, and I apologize because I know that teaching is the worst profession for acronyms, but it's that return on instruction, that return on your instructional investment. Is there evidence of what you taught in the work? And that's what you have to kind of analyze your session, your materials, your examples through the lens of what is present in my student work that aligns to what I taught the most. And it's not just important to identify those features, it's also important to think about what practices that you used to get that kind of success where your examples have that. So was it small group instruction, whole group instruction, student collaboration, peer work? What kinds of, not only what features, but what instructional practices are you associating with the things that was it the frequency of how you taught it? Those kinds of things are important to reflect on. And then again, anything additional that needs to be added to the chart, you can put here on top of the features themselves for you. So what I do as a coach at this point, or if I was a teacher and teacher leader, I would just, we would vote in some cases. Some teams just like to have a conversation. We would talk about which one we really think reflects proficiency. I would make a copy of that for the team, and they would have that in their folder for next year as a picture of what proficient student work looked like in this unit. So that was a lot. I've done a lot of talking. I would love to know, how do you see this process in the work of developing a picture of proficiency? What makes this work important, are you thinking? How can developing that picture support teachers and students? Guys, listen, I'm going to say this. This process can always improve. So your thinking here is critical to not just this process, but also to helping improve this process. I'm just curious about what you're thinking, but I also use your feedback here to think about improving the process. So anything you can provide here is really helpful. I'm going to take a sip of coffee so that I stop talking. Ooh. Oh, good. It looks like the chat is back on. So again, if you're like me, I'm an unmute and talk kind of person, maybe to everyone's sadness, but here's what I'm going to say. I would love if you wanted to unmute and chat, if that's easier for you, please feel free, or drop your comments in the chat.
Bethany says, looking at student work is the window into students' learning proficiency level.
Yes, I love that. I love that. And sometimes I feel like I love that analogy because it's this window that we're looking through, because it helps us identify student proficiency, but it also helps us think about our impact in our classroom, in our space. Like, how did the things that I chose to do based off my understanding of proficiency get shaped by my ability to focus on those things, on those standards. So it's a window into the student's proficiency level, also being able to reflect the things that we did to help them get there. And it helps with that alignment. Yeah, and here's the thing too that I love about this. It's kind of like that analogy of when the airplane, if you've been on an airplane, I haven't been on an airplane recently, but where they say you have to put your mask on yourself before you can help your children, before you can help someone else. And that's kind of how I view these bookend planning sessions. This is about how are we supporting, how are we giving ourselves time to build the knowledge necessary to close student gaps, to deliver instruction that has the end in mind, that allows us to align our time in the classroom with what kids need to know and be able to do. It also helps us reflect on what kinds of instructional practices we used that were the most effective as teachers. Because if we're only talking about standards that kids aren't mastering, we're not thinking about the context we were teaching at the time, and we're not necessarily thinking about the standards in that context and how much time instructionally we spent on those standards. So I just love this as thinking about it like the air mask for teachers. This is about taking care of our time in connecting to what's important, is critically connected to what students' success looks like. The amount of time that the school can support planning together in this way is going to significantly close gaps for kids, because you're closing that knowledge gap for teachers as well, and giving them time respectfully to develop that understanding. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves, guys. That's why we're spending 7 to 12 hours on Sunday night, on the weekends, planning for our children in our classrooms, because we care so much about them being successful. And to know that there is a practice we can have 8 to 10 times a year that's going to close even greater gaps for our children in this way is something I wanted to share, because I feel strongly about that. But now you're probably wondering, really? Do people really need to do that? So the story I shared earlier about the teacher who followed me down the hallway, I could hear her. And I was trying to walk a little faster because I thought maybe she's not really following me, but she was. And so this is work samples from that team that I'm going to share with you. And this is first grade. Same prompt, same time frame. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to give you a minute. And if you don't care, just on a piece of scratch paper, I'd love for you to jot down what features in this work that you feel like are proficient. And we're going to do this for each piece. There's 3 total pieces for first grade, so it'll be a total of 3 minutes. So just jot down anything that you notice that's important or that you feel like is something that's significant here, but noticing the things that you think maybe the teacher was thinking that would call this first grade piece proficient. What is this child doing that's making this teacher think this student work is proficient? If you want to go ahead and begin, this is sample 1. Just a note, I always pay attention to where children have erased and fixed something. So sometimes that's also clues to what the teacher has supported. Don't leave out the plan either, or evidence of planning. All right. I'm going to move to the next piece. Same team, same grade, that plan together every day. This is piece number 2. You can think about the knowledge that kids built during this unit as well too. Any grammar conventions you're looking for. And also the plan. just because we've had 2 pieces now, if you have time left over, you can jot down any similarities that you're seeing between the piece that I just shared here and this piece that you noticed, and any differences that stand out to you. This is our final piece. So in this case, and I'm sorry that this was so dark, but I took this was on a chart pad in the teacher's classroom, and the teacher, I just took a picture of the chart pad because the teacher had done shared writing with the class based off the end of the unit task. And so they had taped they themselves had taken a picture of this and had taped it into the children's draft book. So this is the piece that was taped into their draft book at the end for the end of the unit exam. So again, noticing any similarities, any differences, anything that stands out to you, or anything you're wondering that you feel like is important. All right, kind of finish up any last things you notice. Let's talk about that now. Let's take a minute to reflect. Please feel free to unmute. It might be easier to unmute at this point and share some of your notices between these 3 pieces. So based off of this set of first grade student work around the end of the unit task, what are some things that you wrote down I'd love to hear that you noticed? Don't be shy.
Bethany says vocabulary support. And as you and I were talking earlier, teacher expectations, looking at how each of the 3 looks, just at a glance, you know, the expectations were, I think, different for each one. So I don't know if that's something that they really had discussed beforehand.
When you say that, Linda, I'm curious, were you thinking about like when you notice these vocabulary lists?
In part, but also the amount, like the first one was, you know, just the 1 sentence with the picture. Mm-hmm. And then the second one was vocabulary or the words in the boxes, because I can't see it real well, and the amount of writing that they did. And then the third wasn't individual, it was a group effort. So I just felt like the teacher expectations are a little different.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you noticed that. Yeah, because language and vocabulary too, and even the frequency with which kids read the text or engaged with the text or texts that were similar, I feel like mattered here as well too. It made me wonder, how many times did this teacher read the text about Charlotte's, like how many times, what parts of the text did they read? How often did they read the story of the spider versus this piece, for example? It makes me wonder, because of the extensive vocabulary list it seems like the teacher had provided, had they read lots of texts around spiders and Charlotte and information about Charlotte and the novel, as well as the Spider and the Fly book. Made me wonder about that. Anything else? You guys are so quiet. I'm going to wait another awkward minute or 30 seconds or so to see if you all would like to unmute and share, because your connections here are very helpful. What are some things you noticed about this set of work? I guess my curiosity too is, are you seeing maybe the need for this kind of work? Yeah,
modeling had to have taken place, definitely.
Yep. Well, and even just the structure of the shared writing piece had to happen whole group, and I'm assuming the kids are either sitting on the floor building that, and I wondered how often they wrote, and did they write all of that, and did she write all of that in one sitting, those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. So I just have to tell you, it's like how this, so the rest of the story, the Paul Harvey moment here for me, as well as the teacher that had been a teacher leader and had lots of training. She followed me. I could hear her behind me after the meeting was over. And this time I stopped and turned around immediately. And she said, I want to say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that I assumed that we were on the same page. This is a team that planned together every day, that shared everything that they had, and their interpretation of what proficiency looked like, as Linda was talking about with expectations, they had no idea their expectations for children were not aligned. And so trying to figure out, it took us a couple of times to get comfortable and look at some of the anchor papers that they had created earlier to kind of get a better sense of what proficiency looked like, because they were nervous going into the next unit that they really didn't have a good grasp on what that was. So we went back through the process of unpacking the prompt and talked more specifically about those features and spent more time there based off of this realization from this work, which is why I wanted to share that, because they felt like this helped them see that they needed to be more centered around proficiency. This set of work next is fourth grade work samples. So I wanted to share this with you because I feel like this shows too some different, like how instructional focus can impact, as Linda was talking about, teacher expectation and instructional practice. Also, this was done around the same time of year as this work, same protocol. I will be waiting a minute. And as you read through the work, notice things that you feel like are making that work proficient. And then when you get to the second set, if you want to write down similarities and differences, you can, but I'll be giving you about a minute of private think time to jot those things down and to read the text. There's 2 pieces in this set. So the first piece is 2 slides long and the second piece is 1 slide long. All right. Same prompt, same unit, same team. I'm going to click to the next slide as it is part of this prompt. Don't forget to think about maybe some connections you've made to what was some of the instructional practices here, or focus of that instruction that the teacher had that you're seeing in the students' work. All right, I'm going to move to the next slide. If I need to go back, let me know. This prompt is all on one page. So.
Guys, I'll come back out to speak.
Oh. All right. Don't forget too to jot down any similarities and differences that you're seeing between this essay and the one that we just shared. Again, same grade level, 4th grade, same prompt, same team, same school. So now that we're kind of to a minute, is everybody good? Are we good to go ahead? Give me a thumbs up if you are ready to move on. Enough time? Oh, good. Richard, Richard Taylor, you raised your hand. Do you have a question? Oh, you're good. Okay. All right, so again, same kind of thing. When you look at this example of student work and you look at this example, what are you noticing about the differences in the student work? What are some things that you picked up on? I'm curious. Feel free to unmute or to drop it. Oh, Linda, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Catherine says she noticed editing.
Yes. In the second piece, Catherine, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, that's the one I'm talking about. I love the editing marks even at such a young grade.
Yeah.
Of course, you know, that's not my background, so I'm easily impressed.
Oh, well, and they transitioned from 3rd grade to 4th grade, starting to really focus on the structure of what an essay looks like in the 4-paragraph essay. And I'm going to go back here to this first example. I could tell here too, it made me wonder, I feel like this teacher had modeled a lot of what an essay is supposed to look like. Maybe not necessarily this topic, but had probably had up in the room some modeling that she had or he had done related to writing an essay. Because they transitioned to the 4-paragraph essay, and this is around October in the 4th grade school year, so they're starting to add that complexity to it. And I couldn't help but notice here this phrase, in conclusion. So it made me feel like that's because that's kind of a new thing for 4th grade to start mastering. Yeah, for sure. Anything else?
Well, 2 points. It appears there's a lot more of the, as you say, the 4-paragraph structure in the first one. For the second one, the student, there was very little persuasive points. It was just more of a rambling discussion. One thing I did notice on the second one is the plus and minus marks down the side, which looks like it was a guide by the teacher to help the students realize, you know, I need to skip every other line, which was a really good tool.
Yeah, it's almost, yeah, I'm glad that you pointed that out, Richard. It made me wonder if she knew, like Catherine pointed out about the editing, if she was going to come in and support editing the piece after they finished writing it, and so that they would need that space to add those editing marks. I don't know, but thank you for sharing. Yes. Yeah, so again, this team taught this unit at the same time and had sort of different results. And so it was very helpful to go through this process and try to identify the work features in both of these pieces that sat with proficiency for the team. And I will say that the 4th grade and 5th grade sessions that I had in the school were typically the ones that tended to add more to the student work features, where with K-1, 2, I noticed the pattern of wanting to add behavioral proficiency, like the sounds and letter association and attempts at those in their writing, not necessarily whole words, just based off what was appropriate at that time versus what had been taught. So there was a lot more conversation around foundational skill focus. So again, I'm just curious because I feel like I've given you, if you will, the secret sauce of a lot of times my support for helping to close gaps. This work does close gaps. It closes gaps for students by helping teachers support themselves and take care of their knowledge about what proficiency means. But it's not like this is a point that we're looking for an exact answer. This is a process that develops pictures of proficiency, and we're always developing that proficiency. It's not a place we get to and we stop. The years that we teach, the children that we have, these are things that are constantly changing, and this process gives us time to pause and really reflect deeply on what it is we're doing to support proficiency and what that means. So I'm really curious to know, how will today's learning, how do you see today's learning? And maybe it's not all of it, maybe it's part of it, or maybe it's something that you learned today will impact your practice and support proficiency and closing gaps. What are you still wondering about? What are some things that you'd like to have more information about? I have some information that John has said that I could get to you all through your email address from registration that I'm going to send out after our session is over. But I'm still so curious about what are you thinking about with regards to today's learning that you feel like is going to impact your practice to close gaps and support proficiency at your school, in your classroom. Please feel free to unmute if that's easier. Well, they're so quiet.
They are. Mandy says that working together towards a common goal and being on the same page as to what proficiency looks like.
Yes. Working together is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for me, it's about just beginning with the end in mind. Like for me to build a picture of proficiency and ultimately close gaps, I have to know what proficient looks like. And so ideally, I'm doing that with some colleagues, but even as an individual teacher, I taught in a small school, so I was, sixth grade ELA. I didn't have colleagues, but I could still really dig into my materials and start to formulate that idea of what am I looking for? What's that exemplar response, whether it's to a single question or whether it's to that end of unit essay, what's that exemplar response that's going to let me know that this student's proficient and what can I do to support it?
I love that you brought that up, Bethany, like especially for teachers that teach in isolation. This is a critical practice to help take care of the knowledge that you're having to manage on your own as you move into a unit. And just knowing that concept of like being able to identify what proficiency looks like before we start spending all of this energy in our classroom taking care of students and making sure that we're moving in the right direction just helps inform all of those decisions so that we become more efficient as well. So I appreciate you bringing that up because yeah, even if you're an isolated teacher, you're by yourself, you're the only person teaching kindergarten, first grade, this is a way to organize information for yourself that helps you become an informed decision maker in your classroom. And it's really powerful as we've looked at with the Hattie research and its correlation to positive student outcomes.
Sarah, I'm going to drop a link in the chat that's from, the opportunity myth that you mentioned. There's a student work library that lets you kind of see aligned work, aligned student student work, excuse me, and then those assignments. So, you know, for folks who maybe are in isolation, like I would have been as that teacher, it's just neat to be able to see, well, what does proficient look like in 6th grade or 5th grade? And it has math and ELA, I believe.
Well, and I will say too, that a lot of the units that they already have in their hands provide exemplars, and that's not necessarily mean that we don't need to do this work. That just means that when we think about making the student work features, that we have some more information to provide a more accurate list of what features in student work need to be present. So if you do have materials that provide student work, absolutely use that to inform this process and these protocols, because it's going to help you get closer to that understanding in a really informed way and make you even more empowered going into your unit instruction. I just wanted to say too, to kind of reiterate, I think it was Mandy who had said that about teamwork. And, you know, we need each other and the ability to see the impact of our work. Student success depends on it, but, you know, it is hard work. I'm not going to make light of that. It is hard work. It's extremely focused work. And I just wanted to put one of my favorite quotes. My first principal read this at a volunteer luncheon and it made me cry. I won't read the whole poem, and I'm not going to cry. I'll try not to cry. But it just says, I love people who harness themselves an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. And again, just to reiterate, this work is messy. It's somewhat unclear, but as a team or as an individual, when you start to take care of the knowledge that you need to make better decisions for your kids, it closes gaps big time for all learners, not just kids below grade level, but for kids who are above grade level. And like Mandy was talking about, especially for your special ed teachers and your teachers who are paraprofessionals that come into your classroom, this helps you make better decisions about how they spend their time and gives them ideas of how they can support ELL teachers, how they can support your students to make sure that they get to proficiency. And it would be wonderful to invite them, like Bethany was saying, if you are a teacher by yourself, invite that special ed teacher to do this process with you. Invite that ELL teacher from the district or from your school to come and sit in and do this work with you. I promise you, even though it's messy, it has great returns and it's well worth your time. So I want to say, because we're 3 minutes over, thank you so much for being here with us today. I really enjoyed it and appreciated learning from you all, and hope that you have an opportunity to try this out.
I think what Candy said in the last chat was, I'm looking forward to using these methods to plan with my team. I think the backward planning will definitely help our focus, and this will truly help close gaps and help more of our students become proficient based on our goals. I think that perfectly sums up exactly what was going on in this particular webinar. And Sarah, we thank you for what you've done today. So we're at the end of our session, and we thank you so much for attending the Virtual Summer Institute session with us. There will be a recording of this session posted to the website soon, and we'd love for you to take this 1-minute survey. And this survey will allow us to reflect on your thoughts about the session, because we're all teachers. We're all willing and we want to improve our craft, and it will allow you to receive a certificate of attendance for the session. So at this time, a link is being dropped in the chat, and if you will take the survey, and then there will be a second screen that's going to ask or talk to you about the certificate, and you will receive that very shortly. So I'm going to hand it back over to Sarah for any concluding thoughts.
I just want to say thank you, and look forward to hearing, if you all were able to engage in this work, hearing the success as you begin this journey. And it's truly the work that will help close gaps for kids, for all kids. And I look forward to a start of the new school year. So thank you so much for your time. And it was great to be here today. And thank you all.